Hi, I'm Shana Fannon, interior designer and advocate for connection, and this is GoodByDesign, a show about what defines us as individuals and how that influences what we create. And today we welcome Faith Musembi. Hi, Faith, how are you doing?
Hey Shayna, I'm good. How are you doing in Jersey?
I'm good. So you're in Kenya. So in fact, there's a significant time difference between us. So I'm so glad we were able to work out this time. You're a filmmaker, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to filmmaking.
So yes, I'm a filmmaker and I like describing myself as a hybrid. Typically, you'll find filmmakers will focus either on fiction, which is, what we'll go and see in the movies, but then there are those that do documentaries, wildlife documentaries. And so I do both. I haven't focused on one. So that's what I'm good at. At my heart, I just love telling stories. It's quite difficult to say what got me into filmmaking because I've always, as far back as I can remember, I've always loved filmmaking, storytelling with the visual medium. My parents' love for movies ever since we were young. They started us off on the classics, and I think that's where my love for filmmaking came from.
You are like, I'm not going to be categorized as just a documentary filmmaker or as a fictional movie maker. So I think that there's now coming into play the ability to tell kind of a true story or something that's based on a true story using fiction to make something maybe more palatable or easier to understand.
I agree with that. And I think a lot of it has to do with how accessible technology has become. In the past, you'd find people would tend to focus on one thing because cameras were so expensive. You're gonna, shoot or edit anything, you invest so much that it makes sense that you're gonna stick to that one thing and use that equipment. But now you can just do all manner of things right on your laptop and, quality projects, not amateurish production. So I think because of that accessibility, you find people able to flow between different genres
Yeah.
quite easily, yeah, without straining themselves. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. Do you find that one kind of inspires the other for you? Like if you're working on a documentary that might help to inspire some kind of, fictional film or some aspect of a fictional, idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because one of the things about wildlife filmmaking, and specifically something called blue chip wildlife filmmaking, which is, these epic productions that you'll see on National Geographic or Discovery, just the really beautiful wildlife documentaries. To film those, we end up spending so much time in the field, just like sitting and sitting and sitting. If you're filming lions, what most people might not know is lions spend most of the day sleeping. So
Mm.
because you're waiting for them to get up, do something interesting, you have to sit with them and you find, because you're out in nature, it's stunning, gorgeous. You just have so much time to come up with all these crazy
Mm.
ideas. Yeah. So I find anytime I'm on production in the field, uh, I keep a notebook or I'll use the notes app on my phone and jot down ideas. If I'm working on a fiction piece, I'll find that we'll go to a location and I'll think, oh my goodness, it's so sad, that we're filming in this area that used to be a natural habitat for lions, and now we don't have any lions in this area. We need to do a story about that. So
Yeah.
there's a nice ebb and flow.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned also when I asked you if you would be a guest on the show, you mentioned that like this week was perfect because next week you're going to be filming in the bush. And I would love for you to talk about, what does it feel like to be filming in the bush? What exactly, for those who don't necessarily understand what that means, what does that mean? How did you kind of settle into wildlife?
We for granted, we'll say in a bush and we know what it means, but it's basically the equivalent of saying in the wilderness.
Yeah.
So Kenya has so many wilderness areas. I am going to an area called Amboseli. And Amboseli, you may not know that you know Amboseli, but basically if you've ever seen a picture of an elephant with Kilimanjaro in the background,
Mm.
that's been taken at Amboseli. We're heading there next week. And the reason I love wildlife, my mom grew up in that area in Amboseli. her stories from when she was growing up are just, it sounds like fairy tales anytime because those were my bedtime stories growing up. She'd tell us about how they'd be walking to school and come across elephants and lions and all kinds of things. And because of urbanization, that's changed. I mean, you don't see that volume of wildlife like they used to. But I think through hearing those stories, I fell in love with wildlife. Unfortunately, I never thought that I could do wildlife filmmaking because that's not a tradition that local Kenyans can get into. Yeah, because you'll find and it's something that the National Geographics and the BBCs are trying to change. But you'll find when they come to do documentaries, because obviously they film a lot of content here, they'll fly in a whole crew of British citizens or, American citizens. So they're trying to change that. So growing up, I never thought that I could ever be a part of such a crew. Then lately, because that's been shifting, I've found it was really a happy accident how I got into it, because my schooling and my experience was in filmmaking, and I love wildlife. And there was this job opportunity a few years ago to film wildlife, and I realized that's exactly where I want to be. So and from that, it's just flown from project to project, and it's wonderful.
I know that you're creating films with a purpose, with an intention, trying to get a specific thought out into the world. These fiction, specifically fiction movies, I think more particularly, what is that message that you want to get out there, and what kind of really brought that message to the surface for you?
I love our history as Africa, and specifically as Kenyans, and that's something that you don't see anywhere really. I mean, even in our own schools, we're not taught our history properly. Because
you're in America there.
So I mean, it's the same thing here. Kenya's a very young democracy, and you'll find we got our independence in 1963, and up until that point, it was a British education system because we were colonized, and that's kind of seeped into our present day education system. So my message, I love telling stories that reframe and restructure some of our history, but kind of presenting it with lenses of technology. So for instance, I just did a science fiction short film about potential aliens in Kenya. The true story behind all of that, there are quite a lot of things I mined from our culture and our history to kind of repackage that and show people we can tell stories by mining our own culture and celebrating it, because we don't get to do that often. My biggest drive is to change that narrative, to show people, yeah, we're different. We have intelligent people, we have a beautiful history, we have beautiful cultures, and we essentially need to believe it ourselves, because it's not just an issue of perception. We need to believe it, to tell these stories, paint these pictures, and change that.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think who we are as people and what we present to the world has a lot to do with it has everything to do with how we view ourselves. And I think when we don't view ourselves as being, I almost want to say, like, being able to take up space, like when we really don't think that we have a proper place in the world, when we really don't understand our purpose and our role, we diminish our understanding of ourselves, and we diminish how powerful we can be, and we diminish how well we can be used for positive things in this world. And I think when you have an entire community or an entire country who hasn't been allowed or been given the voice to say we matter, you were not your own, and now being able to be your own country, being able to be in a place where now you get to find your voice. I think it's really important that people like yourself be able to show people what it's like to use your voice and to have a voice, and to know that that voice matters. So I think what you're doing is really, truly incredible, which is why I wanted you to be on the show and to talk to you more. Thank you for coming on the show, Faith. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shana. This has been wonderful.